Now going to question number 18. This is a question on types of x-intercepts. But first, let's talk for a moment about the difference between an x-intercept and a factor, or how they relate to one another. And here's an example we call the quadratic sequence. Let's just say you had this function, and you had to find the x-intercepts. To find the x-intercept, y is 0. So you set it equal to 0. That's your permission to factor. And the two numbers that add to -2 and multiply to -35 are -7 and 5. Then you use the zero product rule where you set each piece independently equal to 0. And when you solve them both, you get your two x-intercepts. They're also called roots, solutions, and zeros. But for our purposes right now, let's talk about them as x-intercepts. So if you have a factor of x minus 7, that corresponds to an x-intercept of x equals +7. A factor of x plus 5, that corresponds to an x-intercept of x equals -5. So coming back to this question, if we have an x-intercept of x equals -5, that corresponds to a factor of x plus 5. Here in red, we have an x-intercept of x equals 4. So the factor would be the opposite, x minus 4. And last but not least, right here in the middle, that's an x-intercept of x equals 0. So then we would have x minus 0, or just x. So we've already talked about how this relates to the quadratic sequence. Now, let's talk about the different types of x-intercepts you can have. If a function is just kind of moving around, doing its thing, and when it crosses the x-axis, it crosses the street, that would be, most likely, a factor to the first power, what we might refer to as a single root. If, on the other hand, our function is just going around doing its thing, and when it hits the x-axis, it bounces off like a wall, that's what we would refer to as a double root, something to the second power. So it's good to know the difference between a single root that crosses and a double root that bounces off. So now we can look and see which of these are crossing and which are bouncing off. This one is crossing, so that's going to be to the first power. And this one is crossing, that can be to the first power. But this one is bouncing off. The x plus 5 factor, which came from the x-intercept of x equals -5, that one has to be to the second power. So we're looking for x plus 5, x minus 4, and x, with the x plus 5 being to the second power. And so we have the x plus 5 to the second power right here, x minus 4 to the first power, x to the first power. And so we know that this has to be answer choice B. It's the only one that fits what we said.